When exhausted nurse Melanie Brown was unfairly detained at a gas station by security guard Mike Henderson, her simple night turned into a battle for dignity. Henderson's relentless suspicion and misuse of authority made Melanie's ordeal a powerful symbol of injustice. But one courageous call to Captain Mark Dalton set off a chain of events that overturned the power dynamic. Experience how Melanie's determination sparked a dramatic reckoning and why justice finally prevailed in her unforgettable story. Late at night, Melanie Brown drove alone along the empty highway. The kind of darkness that settles over rural South Carolina in early autumn, stretching endlessly beyond her headlights. Her hands ached from hours at the hospital, and she longed for the familiar comfort of her daughter's voice at the other end of the phone. Spotting a glowing gas station in the distance, she exhaled, relieved to find a place to rest, refuel, and make her call. The station, ringed by harsh fluorescent lights and the soft glow of vending machines, represented a fleeting sense of safety in the night's emptiness. Melanie pulled up beside one of the pumps and glanced at the clock on the dashboard. It was past midnight, but the sign on the window declared, bright and unmistakable, "Open 24 hours." She sat in her car for a moment, collecting herself, then stepped outside, pulling her jacket close against the chill and tucking her phone securely into her hand. Stars blinked through breaks in the clouded sky as she walked slowly toward the shop entrance, fatigue and anticipation mixing within her. A rumble from behind made her pause. A security SUV rolled into the lot, headlights washing over the concrete and briefly dazzling her eyes. The vehicle parked abruptly at an angle, its door flying open before the engine had even fully died. The lead guard, Mike Henderson, strode over with a rigid, mechanical assuredness. His partner, less visible, remained near the car, quietly scanning the lot. Without introduction, Mike's voice cut the silence, deep and sharp. He called out, demanding to know what Melanie was doing there at such an hour. His question carried the weight of accusation rather than concern. Startled but composed, Melanie replied, gesturing calmly toward the 24-hour sign and explaining her intention to buy coffee and use her phone. She kept her tone measured and polite, hoping to diffuse any suspicion. Mike's expression hardened as he stepped closer, blocking her path to the door. "This site is closed at night," he insisted, contradicting the sign behind her. For a moment Melanie thought of explaining again, but she could sense that reason would do little to alter his stance. His eyes flickered to her car, to her hospital badge, to her hand clutching the phone, a silent inventory of doubt. The silence stretched, thick with tension. He began toast for her identification and details about her schedule. Melanie complied, handing over her ID and quietly stating she was just off work. Mike studied her credentials for longer than necessary, as though searching for an invisible fault. The air grew increasingly charged as he started suggesting she might be loitering or causing a disturbance. Melanie felt her heartbeat quicken, not out of guilt, but from the sudden realization that her presence alone had become a problem to solve. Mike then requested that she open her bag so he could check for any prohibited items. Alarmed by the intrusion and feeling her privacy stripped away, Melanie instinctively hesitated, explaining that there was nothing but her wallet, some pens, a half-used notepad. Mike, unmoved, leaned in closer, his posture brimming with authority, signaling that non-compliance would only make things worse. Nearby, a few other customers lingered in their parked cars, watching the encounter unfold. Their faces were illuminated only by the pale glow of smartphone screens and dashboard lights. No one dared intervene. Instead, the isolation intensified, making the parking lot feel like a stage upon which Melanie was cast as both intruder and spectacle. Mike's partner joined, standing a step behind as reinforcement, quietly asking Melanie to stay put by her car until the matter was resolved. The implication was clear. Until Mike determined otherwise, she would not be allowed to carry out her simple errand. Melanie stood still, the cold from the metal car door seeping into her back, feeling a growing sense of helplessness as she realized how powerless she was to shift the narrative being written about her in real time. Her thoughts raced, disbelief mixing with simmering anger and humiliation. How had an ordinary stop on a quiet night spiraled into an ordeal of suspicion? There was nothing she could say or do to sway their fixed assumptions, and the effort to remain calm left her trembling inside. A deep discomfort planted itself in her chest, not only for herself but for awareness of all those unseen bystanders who might one day find themselves just as exposed. Even in the thick of anxiety, Melanie noticed something, a quiet defiance in her own posture, a refusal to let the experience define her entirety. She met Mike's gaze, steady and unbroken, even as he radioed the incident in, his voice clipped and formal. She knew instinctively that what was happening was not just about her, but about something larger, and that for the first time in her life, she could not simply let it pass in silence. The aftermath of the gas station incident weighed heavily on Melanie Brown for days. She drove home in numbed silence that night, replaying every word and gesture, searching for a reason behind the suspicion and the cold denial of her dignity. The next morning the sun rose with little comfort. Melanie's world felt altered, colder and less welcoming than before. Her exhaustion compounded, now not just from the long shift at the hospital, but from the burden of her treatment outside its doors. She sat beside her kitchen window, hands curled tight around a cup of tea, staring out at passing cars, wondering if any of their drivers understood what it felt like to be publicly doubted for no reason at all. Determined to seek accountability, Melanie called the local police department as soon as her mind cleared enough for action. She explained her situation, her voice steady but tinged with hurt, describing how she was wrongly accused and humiliated, only to be met with bureaucratic deflection. The officer on the other end maintained a professional tone, acknowledging her distress, but quickly pointed out that the guards worked for a private security company, not the city, and they had no jurisdiction over how private firms conducted their business. Melanie tried not to let disappointment show through the phone. She insisted her only intention was to buy coffee and rest for a moment before driving home, and that she had done nothing to warrant their suspicion or interference. But the calm, procedural response reaffirmed her sense of isolation. She left the station unsatisfied, the pain of the previous night unmistakably present. At the hospital, news of her experience filtered through colleagues, some expressing familiar empathy, others cautioning her to drop the matter. "It's better sometimes not to stir things up," a nurse warned gently, suggesting that challenging the guards could become a distraction and might lead to even more distress. Melanie struggled to accept their advice. What had started as a small act of defiance now felt necessary, as if her own peace of mind depended on refusing passive acceptance. Meanwhile, Mike Henderson recounted the story to his peers with a different inflection. Within the break room of the security company, he claimed to have only acted out of concern for safety and regulations. His partner nodded in agreement, reflecting a culture in which suspicion of outsiders was considered responsible, a mindset meant to ensure order, but sometimes blind to its own consequences. For Mike, his role was to uphold rules and prevent trouble, his motivations shaped by a belief in the need to be vigilant even when no threat was evident. Each day, he justified his actions as necessary for the greater good, certain that maintaining a watchful presence was part of his professional obligation. Yet in the wider world, events did not fade quietly. A witness at the gas station posted online, recounting the tense exchange and noting how Melanie had remained calm despite growing pressure. While some commenters sided with the guards, others questioned the motives behind their scrutiny. The story gained traction as a discussion of bias and the emotional toll such moments inflict. People resonated with Melanie's struggle not because it was rare, but because it was painfully familiar for too many. Days passed, but for Melanie the sense of injustice sharpened each time she recalled the silent crowd, the lack of support, and the professional coldness she encountered in every official response. She thought of her daughter, of the future she wanted for her, one where a simple act like stopping for coffee would never carry such risks. Motivation for action grew as pain deepened into resolve, a need to stand up not only for herself, but for anyone who had ever felt powerless in the shadow of authority. Her decision formed in the echo of sleepless nights and unwelcome memories. She would not let this humiliation define her. With clarity born of hardship, Melanie was ready to bring her account to someone who could truly listen. She understood her motivations now with singular certainty. She was driven by a belief in a better world, in the necessity of speaking when silence would mean acceptance. That conviction prepared her for the steps ahead, no matter how uncertain they seemed. Melanie's decision to reach out to Captain Mark Dalton was not made lightly. The thought circled in her mind, surrounded by doubts and fears, but also by the persistent urge to reclaim her dignity and assert her truth. On a Tuesday morning, sunlight flickering through the blinds, she entered her home office, her heart racing as she dialed the phone number listed for the security company's headquarters. She rehearsed her words in silence, determined to be clear, factual, and unwavering. Mark Dalton, seasoned and thoughtful, answered with the composed authority that came from years of leading teams through difficult situations. Melanie introduced herself and explained what had happened at the gas station. Her voice was measured but laced with emotion, the exhaustion of reliving each detail etching a gravity that even Mark noticed through the receiver. He listened in silence, breaking only to ask concise, clarifying questions. The narrative she built was steady and true, a story not only of a single night's humiliation, but of the accumulated pain that sometimes flourished in places meant to be safe. Mark promised to review the incident personally. He requested security footage and logs, determined to look past summaries and into the context that makes events real. Over the next days, he watched the video in its entirety, not just the official reports, but also the segments where Mike Henderson's tone and actions shifted, where suspicion clouded reasonable judgment. Mark found himself reflecting on the gap between protocol and common decency, on the invisible lines that, when crossed, threatened the very values the company was meant to uphold. As the investigation unfolded, Mark invited Melanie to meet him at a local cafe. The air was brisk and fresh, and Melanie arrived early, sitting by the window in nervous anticipation. Mark joined her, placing a folder on the table and greeting her with a tone that balanced formality with respect. He confessed the discomfort he felt as he investigated the event, revealing that this was not the first time concerns had been raised about Mike Henderson's conduct. Mark's words were careful, never making promises but assuring Melanie her story had become more than just another complaint. It was a push toward accountability. During the meeting, Melanie described the encounter in full, this time allowing the depth of her frustration and pain to surface. She spoke of her career in healthcare, of the standards she held herself to, and how painful it was to be viewed as a threat for no reason. Mark listened intently, sometimes silent for long stretches, scribbling notes when Melanie's recollections revealed details not visible on footage, her feelings of isolation, her disappointment in public indifference, the moment she realized her voice deserved to be heard. Moved by the courage and eloquence she displayed, Mark committed to a transparent review. He contacted other employees, checked background complaints and prior incidents. In reviewing the company's values, he found clarity in Melanie's words, that it was not enough for justice to be private, but that the truth must be acknowledged publicly. Mark faced a moral dilemma: protect the company's reputation, or act according to principle, even if it came at a personal cost. As word spread within the company, some colleagues questioned Mark's approach, fearing repercussions. Yet others rallied behind him, motivated by Melanie's relentless pursuit of fairness. Stories about the incident found their way online, with strangers expressing outrage and support. A ripple effect began. People reposted Melanie's testimony, some sharing their own experiences with injustice and the challenges of being heard. The more Melanie spoke, the more her resolve inspired others to speak up. For Mark, the investigation became a turning point. He recalled experiences from his own past, times when silence seemed the safest option, but now recognized that real leadership required vulnerability and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Together, Melanie and Mark transformed a moment of pain into an opportunity for change, drawing in the voices of community members who saw themselves reflected in her struggle. The review exposed a pattern, a troubling history of complaints against Mike Henderson. The evidence, combined with Melanie's account, forced the company to consider not just one incident, but a culture in peril. The decision loomed: defend the status quo, or acknowledge a truth that demanded justice. Mark chose the latter, finding in Melanie's journey a powerful reminder that authority is most meaningful when it supports those who dare to challenge it. Throughout the process, Melanie felt her fear subsiding, replaced by a growing sense of responsibility. Her willingness to speak emboldened others. She became not only a voice for her own dignity, but a catalyst for change. What had begun as a lonely act of resistance evolved into a collective call for equity, a story to be told and retold in the hope that no one would ever feel as powerless as she did that night. Mark Dalton's decision to bring the entire incident into the light quickly caused ripples throughout the community and within the company. After formally presenting his collected evidence to the security firm's leadership, he stood firm in his conviction. He insisted that acknowledging what had happened to Melanie Brown was not only a matter of procedure, but also a matter of principle. Moments like these, he argued, defined who they were as an organization and shaped the way the public would trust them for years to come. In the wake of this review, the company took swift action. Mike Henderson was dismissed following the revelation of multiple, previously overlooked complaints. Policies that had once seemed untouchable were overhauled, training procedures rewritten, lines of reporting altered, new standards for communication and accountability established. Leaders at all levels were called to reflect on the culture they fostered and to commit to an environment where trust was earned and respect maintained for all. The narrative moved away from one isolated event and became a catalyst for systemic improvement, not just within the company, but across other security firms watching from the sidelines. As the story broke in the media, it resonated with a broad audience. Local newspapers described Melanie's courage, and social media became flooded with messages supporting her actions. People saw her not just as a victim, but as a leader, someone whose voice had kindled change beyond her own circumstances. These messages became a force of encouragement, reaching Melanie at home and at work, filling her life with a sense of belonging she had never expected to find from strangers. She read letters from people who recognized themselves in her story, who said that her perseverance inspired them to confront their own moments of injustice. During interviews, Mark Dalton spoke candidly about the trial of conscience he had experienced. For him, the choice had come down to accountability versus expedience, honesty versus comfort. Admitting mistakes, he explained, was the first step toward repair and real progress. His public statements underscored a new spirit in the company, one where leadership meant responding to challenges with humility and the courage to change. In time, Mark's own reputation grew stronger. His act of transparency nurtured a higher standard, not only for co-workers, but for the community that depended on their service and integrity. For Melanie, the transformation was slow but deeply felt. She was invited to participate in forums about community safety and equitable treatment, meeting others who had undergone similar ordeals. Her words carried weight, not because she had sought out attention, but because she had spoken with authenticity. The pain she once felt so sharply began to ease as it was reshaped by accomplishment, and the knowledge that her actions had improved the path for those who would follow. At the hospital, colleagues expressed admiration. Those who had once advised silence now thanked her for her bravery. Returning one evening to the gas station, Melanie found the place unchanged and yet filled with a new sense of possibility. The air was crisp and the lights familiar. As she poured her coffee and exchanged a few kind words with the attendants, the atmosphere seemed different, open, safe, dignified. For a moment she stood in quiet reflection, remembering the events that had set so much in motion. Gratitude welled inside her, not just for her own journey, but for the people whose encouragement had fueled her will to keep pushing toward fairness. Her experience continued to ripple outward. Policy changes inspired other organizations to re-examine their own standards. Local leaders referenced her case as proof that one voice, supported by integrity and truth, could help an entire community shed complacency. The ongoing dialogue about justice and respect deepened. Melanie's resolve reminded everyone watching that enduring change is fueled by those willing to speak and persist. Melanie knew that the scars from her ordeal would not vanish, but she also recognized the new strength within herself. The chapter closed not with bitterness, but with hope that the fledgling improvements would last. Her story became something larger than any single headline or report, testament to the transformative power of standing firm. and a bright example for anyone feeling invisible or alone. The sense of satisfaction and inspiration she felt was lasting. Justice, though imperfect, had prevailed, and Melanie's courage had ensured it would be remembered.